In order to give our presentation some footing in reality, what we've decided to do is to take one particular case, a hypothetical case, so that we can quote examples throughout the presentation that relate to that specific application. So we're going to talk about, because of the year it is, football content, and we're going to think about how you would repurpose that, how you would do a live HD broadcast, say for example, of your prime show of a football match, how you then produce a highlights package, maybe for your SD channel after the show, how you might repurpose that same highlight package for delivery on an IPTV cable network, how you might deliver different highlight clips to a mobile network, and also how you would deliver from that same source content to a website that was attached to that football league. So we're going to think at those different kinds of applications. Obviously we could think of, I'm sure everybody here has a different set of scenarios that you could use, but they will give us the ability to pin some examples on it, and we can show how different points during the process we can take some examples and work through those. Like I said, we'll talk a lot about metadata. If we look at our example workflows, we've got some different kinds of metadata that we'll be interested in as we go down through the process. We've got the existence of automated metadata. One of my pet themes whenever I'm talking about MAM and metadata is not to create a new task for somebody, which is to type in the metadata. Almost always that metadata exists somewhere else within the organisation, in some other database form, in some other digital system somewhere else. Think about where you can get that and how you can integrate it in with what you're doing and pull it in. Obviously, in the case of football, there's a perfect example of this. The Delta Trade data feeds provide a very wide range of different types of metadata available that we can tag against our video as it starts to come in. And that gives us a perfect way of starting to index that material as it starts to flow. And we'll look at how that gets achieved in reality. We've then got a very different sort of metadata, which is the timings. So we'll segment up the media to highlight different parts. You might mark up the whole match. So now you know within your recording where the match starts and where the match ends. You'll obviously highlight up special events like goals, red cards, corners and things like that, so you can automatically repurpose those. And there's a whole variety of different types of time markers that we'll want to associate with the media as we go down through that we can then use later on in the process. There is also metadata to think about the relationships between all of the content. We've got the live feed coming in and we're recording as a continuous feed. We've got all sorts of other bits of content wrapped around that. We've got archive that we're pulling in. We've got beauty shots. We may have done interviews the week before. We may be doing interviews during the show. There's all sorts of extra bits of content, and they all relate back to my core assets. And the way those relate and the way you manage those relationships is itself going to help you to reuse those during the production process efficiently. I'm going to touch on one issue that perhaps we're not going to offer you a solution for, but I give it to you to think about. And to be honest, I haven't seen very many clever solutions for this yet. When you're thinking of repurposing, in the example we've got, where we're starting off with an HD feed of a football match, and we're ending up distributing that same feed onto mobile telephones, you have something of a classical problem. The best way to exploit the resolution of the HD is perhaps to put the goal on one side of your shot and to allow the game to play up to it and to keep it more or less static, and would give you a much better feel of the flow of the game. But if you do that and you were to then crop a 4:3 SD feed out of it, you might find you neither have the goal nor the ball, and you end up sitting watching an empty field. And then if you take that and then put it onto a mobile telephone, which may have the right aspect ratio, everything will become invisible. So actually, just doing something as basic as framing the video becomes quite challenging. There are, of course, many ways you could solve this, but those might add extra effort. So you might say, well, we'll do a pan and scan, but you've then probably added an additional role for somebody to do that, and a lot of technology to then implement that pan and scan as you do the repurposing. Some of those components are available, and some of that could be done. To be honest, I haven't seen it being done anywhere, but there's probably somebody in this room who is doing that. There are other people who actually end up shooting the whole thing twice, and you end up with twice as many cameras, with the cameraman having different instructions to frame it differently for the different outputs. That's the kind of activity we really do need to avoid if we're going to generate this profitability and not duplicating all the activity. But I'll admit, on this one, I don't think we have any golden bullets to solve it for you, but it's an interesting challenge, an interesting one to think about. So let's just look at this production silo concept again. So many places that I go to that are delivering to the web, to mobile, places like that, do have very large separate production organisations. They may take a common source feed, but they will then have their own post-production because they will say, my delivery platform needs a special post-production quality being applied to it, and I need to apply special processing to this material, and I need to edit it in a certain way, and all of those things. Now, if you listen to your creative people, they will argue that case very strongly. And certainly there are many cases where that is true. But just as equally, there are many cases where actually you can take either the whole show or significant components of the show and make them common. So if you're thinking of the live football match, you've obviously got the live feed coming from, but you've probably got a studio, you've probably got some pre-recorded interviews and things. Many of those components themselves can be reused automatically. Maybe the whole show would be challenging to reuse, but some of the components that go into it could be. And thinking about how you can do that and getting everybody thinking about when they produce anything, whether it's the cameraman doing his framing or whether it's the editor doing his edit, how is this going to work when I repurpose it on my different platforms? And like I say, you will have lots of arguments, because I have them all the time, with people who say, no, I'm just doing, our primetime show is the HD live broadcast, I'm only going to think about that, I can't afford to think about anything else. If you allow that mentality to remain, then you will have those problems of reduced profitability because you end up with costs downstream. And you do need to deal with that. And dealing with that philosophy and dealing with that mentality of production is key to being able to make these production process changes that you need. Like I say, you can't enforce it completely all of the time, but you can quite often find components within there where you can have common production processes.